Chapter 4 Mountain-Locked Ancient Temple Forest of Hanging Corpses. Fu Yao noticed that Xiao Ying had snuck into the crowd, and he frowned. Why is there a woman here? While his tone wasn't furious, it didn't mean well either. When Xiao Ying heard him, she bowed her head. Shilian explained, she was worried, so she came here to look. Fu Yao questioned the others. Did you all come up with her? The crowd was a little uncertain at first, but then they replied, Don't remember. Can't tell. No, when we came up she wasn't here, right? Either way, I didn't see her. Me neither. Xiao Ying quickly said, It's because I was following secretly. Xiao Pengtou immediately cut her off. Why did you follow in secret? Are you guilty of something? Are you the Ghostgrim in disguise? With such an accusation, the space near Xiao Ying immediately cleared out, and she waved in a fluster. No, I'm Xiao Ying, I'm real. She turned to Shilian. Young master, we just saw each other. I helped you put on rouge. I did your hair and your whole makeover. Shilian could not find the words to reply to that. Everyone turned their eyes on him, and some started to whisper among themselves. He vaguely heard the words hobby, abnormal, unbelievable, and he cleared his throat. This was a mission requirement. Nanfeng, Fu Yao, you... Shilian looked around, and only then did he notice that Nanfeng and Fu Yao had been staring at him oddly the entire time. They very rigidly pulled some distance away from him. The way they were staring at him gave him goosebumps from head to toe. Is there something you wish to say to me? How could he have known that this girl's makeover work was so gifted that his brows were shaped elegantly, his face was fair as jade powder, and his lips were touched with rouge? If he didn't open his mouth, then he was entirely a gentle demure and beautiful young girl. This gave the two a huge shock and mirrored them in disbelief, making them question their lives and feel uncomfortable all over. Their faces were still the same, but they no longer knew who they were talking to. Fu Yao turned to Nanfeng. Was there something you wanted to say? Nanfeng immediately shook his head. There's nothing I want to say. Why don't you guys just say something? Shilian asked. Just then, some men from the crowd spoke up. This is the Temple of Minguang. There's a Temple of Minguang on this mountain? Amazing, I've never seen it before. The crowd looked over in wonder. Shilian, however, suddenly said, That's right, the Temple of Minguang. Nanfeng could tell something was off about his tone. What is it? Shilian replied, The north is clearly General Minguang's territory. It's not like his worship isn't flourishing, so how come there's only one temple of Nanyang at the foot of Mount Yuzhen? It was easy to understand why the Lord official had prayed to the Heavenly Emperor. The Heavenly Emperor was the #1 martial god of the past 1,000 years, and his status was higher than General Minguang. Naturally, the higher up you prayed, the more guarantee there was. However, General Minguang and General Nanyang were equal in status, with not much difference. If it must be debated, then General Minguang possessed 9,000 temples, over 1,000 more than Nanyang, so it was really hard to imagine why they would seek help from afar and forego what lay close at hand. Shilian wondered. Technically, even if this temple of Minguang on Mount Yuzhen was overtaken and people couldn't find it, they could have simply built another temple of Minguang. Why build the martial temple of another god? Fu Yao could understand. There must be some other reason. Right. There must be another reason that would make the people in Mount Yuzhen, in the Mount Yuzhen area never build another temple of Minguang. Shilian said, Can either of you lend me a bit more spiritual power? I'm afraid I'll have to go ask. Just then, someone made a commotion. Whoa, there's so many brides! That voice had come from inside the temple, and Shilian whipped around. He told that group to properly stay in the open ground in front of the temple, but they ignored him completely and went in. Nanfeng shouted, The situation's dangerous, don't run around. However, Xiao Pengtou rebuked him. Don't listen to him, guys. They won't do anything to us. We're good citizens, as if they'd actually dare kill us. Get up, everyone, get up, get up! He was certain Shilian and company wouldn't actually do anything to them, so he started to riot. Nanfeng cracked his knuckles, looking like he was holding back his curses. As a martial officer of the Palace of Nanyang, how could he break the limbs of mortals whenever he wished? If any supervisory heavenly officials were to report him, it wouldn't be funny. Xiao Pengtou sneered. Don't think I don't know what you guys are thinking. Aren't you just tricking us into not moving so you can steal the credit and go claim the reward for yourselves? With him egging people on, over half of the group actually started to move, and they ran into the temple along with him. Fu Yao waved dismissively and said apathetically, "Let them be, those unruly people." He sounded extremely disgusted, not wanting to care anymore. However, there came a shriek from inside the temple of Minguang. "They're all dead!" Xiao Pingtou was also alarmed. "All dead? All dead! What is this wickedness? This one looks like she's been dead for decades, but she still hasn't rotted?" He quickly got over it, however. "Doesn't matter if they're dead. Transport all the corpses of the brides down the mountain. Their families will still have to pay up anyway." Shilian's eyes slowly darkened. The group gave the idea thought, and it certainly made sense. Some sighed, some grumbled, and there were those who were cheerful again. Shilian stood at the temple entrance. "Why doesn't everyone come outside first? The air in the back of this temple is heavy with death. Without any ventilation for years, there'll be issues if you folks were to breathe it in." This sounded very logical, and the group didn't know whether they should listen. Xiao Ying begged in a small voice, "Everyone, let's not be this way. It's so dangerous here. Why don't we listen to this young master first and go out and sit?" But this group didn't even bother to listen to Shilian, so why would they listen to her? No one paid attention. Xiao Ying didn't give up, however, and repeated herself a few more times. Xiao Pingtou directed them, "Go for the fresh corpses, guys. Who knows if the families of the ones that are too old are still alive? Don't waste your energy hauling those." There were even those who praised him for being clever and able. Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this, and when he saw there were people touching where they shouldn't, he warned aloud, "Don't remove the veils. That veil can separate the chi of the corpse and the chi of the living. There's a lot of you, and the living chi is too abundant. If they suck it in, it's hard to know what will happen." However, in order to pick out the freshest corpses, the group of men had already pulled off pretty much all of the veils. Shilian exchanged a look with Nanfeng, who had come to the door, and shook his head, knowing they couldn't stop them. After all, it wasn't like they could beat the men to a bloody pulp and render them all immobile. Otherwise, if something happened, wouldn't they lose the ability to run? A very hopeless situation. Just then, one of the burly men removed the veil of one of the brides and exclaimed, "My God, this little hussy is super cute!" The men all came to surround the corpse. "She wasn't even married yet, right? What a waste to just die like that. Her clothes are a bit tattered, but she's the prettiest." This bride probably hadn't been dead for too long. The skin of her face was still rather supple. Someone said, "I dare you to feel her up." "What's there to be scared of?" Xiao Pingtou said. Then he pinched the corpse's face a couple of times. It was so silky smooth that it made his heart itch, and he reached out, ready to touch her again. Shilian couldn't bear to watch anymore and was about to stop him when Xiao Ying rushed over. "Don't do this!" she exclaimed. Xiao Pingtou gave her a backhanded shove and yelled, "Don't get in men's way!" But Xiao Ying climbed to her feet again and cried, "You're going to incur heaven's wrath like this!" Xiao Pingtou was furious now and he cursed, "God damn it! You ugly freak! You're so nosy!" He swore as he moved to kick her, but Shilian easily lifted the back of Xiao Ying's collar with one hand and pulled her away. Unexpectedly, however, they heard a thud. Xiao Pingtou yelled, "Who hit me?" Shilian looked back. Xiao Pingtou was bleeding from a gaping wound on the head after having been hit, and there was a blood-stained rock on the ground. Xiao Ying was stunned for a moment before quickly apologizing. Sorry, I was scared and accidentally threw it." However, even if she was eager to take the blame for it, no one would believe her, because the direction was completely wrong. This rock was hurled from a window behind Xiao Pingtou. When Xiao Pingtou yelled, everyone had turned to look in that direction, just in time to see a flash of shadow outside the window. Xiao Pingtou hollered, "It's him! That ugly freak with the bandages on his face!" Shilian stuffed Xiao Ying into Nanfeng's hands and strode a couple steps forward, propping his right hand on the window lattice. He hopped over and ran toward the forest in pursuit. A few of the bolder ones who had their eyes on the bounty followed him and leapt out the window as well. However, when Shilian reached the edge of the forest, he suddenly caught a whiff of blood. Sensing something off, with alarm bells ringing in his head, he came to a sudden halt. He warned, "Don't go in!" He had shouted his warning, but those people thought, "I'll give chase even if you won't," and charged into the forest without stopping. The others, who had originally gathered in the temple, swarmed out too, and when they saw that Shilian stopped at the edge of the woods, those who weren't as bold crowded around to watch. Before long they heard screams and a few shadows stumbled out from the forest. They were the few who had barged in first earlier, and now they were staggering out. When the crowd saw them after they stepped under the moonlight, they were instantly scared out of their wits. They were still living humans when they had entered. How did they become blood-soaked humans when they came out? From their faces to their clothes on their bodies, these people were stained with red, the blood gushing forth like a spring. If someone bled this much, it meant certain death. However, those men were still making their way toward them, step by step. Terrified, everyone retreated uniformly until they were behind Shilian. Shilian raised his hand. Calm down. The blood isn't theirs. Sure enough, those men said, Yeah, the blood isn't ours. It's... Even when drenched in blood, the horror on their faces could not be concealed. The group followed the eyes of those men and looked into the forest. It was pitch black, so they could not see easily what lay within. Shilian took a few steps forward, and then raised it to probe ahead. Something in the darkness dripped onto the torch, giving off a sizzling sound. He glanced at the torch before looking up. After composing himself for a moment, he raised his hand and then tossed the torch up. Although the hurled torch only illuminated the area overhead for an instant, everyone still got a clear look of what had been above the trees. Long, black hair, deathly pale faces, tattered military officers' uniforms, and arms dangling in the air. The swinging corpses of more than 40 men were suspended upside down at varying heights on the trees. No one knew how long their blood had flowed, but they had yet to dry up. They dripped and dripped, forming a terrifying scene. A forest of hanging corpses amidst a falling rain of blood. This group of people outside the forest were all strong, burly men, but they had never seen such a sight before. They were petrified into silence. When Nanfeng and Fu Yao came over and saw this scene, their expressions froze. After a minute, Nanfeng said, Green ghost. Indeed, Fu Yao agreed. It's his favorite trick. Nanfeng turned to Shilian. Don't go over there. It'll be a bit of a problem if it's him. Shilian looked back and asked, Who are you talking about? A near supreme, Nanfeng replied. Shilian asked, puzzled, Near supreme? You mean close to the power level of a supreme? That's right, Fu Yao said. The near supreme green ghost is a malicious creature who has been evaluated by the palace of Lingwen as close to the level of a supreme. He adores games like this forest of hanging corpses. You could say he's infamous. Shilian thought, that's really unnecessary. If you're a supreme, you're a supreme. If you aren't, then you aren't. Just like there's only ascended and not ascended. There's no nearly ascended or about to ascend. Adding a near only makes it awkward for everyone. He recalled that when that young man led him all the way here, there had been the sound of rain pitter-pattering on the surface of his umbrella. Could he have held it up to shield him from the blood rain of the corpse forest? He let out a soft, and the other two immediately asked, What's the matter? He thus gave a brief account of how he had met a young man while he was still in the sedan, and how that young man had brought him here. When he was done, Fu Yao said skeptically, I noticed the enchanted array on the mountain when I came up. It was immensely tough, but he broke it so handily? Shilian thought. Rather, he crushed it under his heel without even noticing the feat. He said, That's right, this near supreme green ghost you speak of. Could that be him? Nanfeng considered it briefly. I've never seen the green ghost before, so I can't say. Does that young man you saw have any distinctive features? Silver butterflies, Shilian said. Earlier, when Nanfeng and Fu Yao saw the forest of hanging corpses, they remained considerably composed. But the instant those two words left Shilian's mouth, he could clearly see the drop in their faces. Fu Yao exclaimed in disbelief, What did you say? Silver butterflies. What kind of silver butterflies? Shilian realized that he had probably said something significant and explained. They're like silver, yet also like crystal. They don't seem to be living creatures, but they look quite pretty. He saw Nanfeng and Fu Yao exchange looks with expressions so grim their faces were almost green. After a while, Fu Yao said darkly, Leave. Right now. We haven't settled the case of the ghost groom yet. How can I leave? Shilian said. Settle? Fu Yao said. He turned back and sneered. Seems like you have really tarried too long in the human realm. This ghost groom is merely a wrath. Even the green ghost of this hanging corpse forest is merely a near supreme, as pesky as he might be. After another pause, he suddenly said in a stern voice, Do you know who the master of those butterflies is? Shilian replied honestly, I don't. Even if you don't, there's no time for me to explain now, Fu Yao said stiffly. In short, he isn't someone you can handle. You'd better hurry back to the heavenly realm and ask for reinforcements. Then you head back first, Shi Lian said. The master of those silver butterflies never showed any hint of malice, Shi Lian said. If he does harbor malice, if he really is as terrifying as you claim, then no one within the perimeter of Mount Yujin would be able to escape his clutches. All the more reason someone has to stand guard here right now. So why don't you go back first and help me seek reinforcements? He could tell Fu Yao didn't want to remain here and deal with so many troublesome matters. If that was the case, then Shi Lian wouldn't force the issue. Fu Yao was a straightforward person, so he really did leave on his own with a toss of his sleeves. Shi Lian turned to Nanfeng and was about to inquire further about that young man when there was another commotion in the crowd. Someone shouted, "We caught him! We caught him!" Now, Shi Lian didn't have the time to ask anything anymore either. Who did you catch? Two more bloody figures emerged from the forest. One was a burly fellow who had charged into the forest earlier, and who was one of the few who was not scared off by the blood rain in the corpse forest. The other one was a young boy, being dragged along by him in a firm grip, his head and face messily wrapped with bandages. Shi Lian still remembered what the tea master he had met earlier in the little shop had said. Apparently, the Ghostgrim is an ugly creature living on Mount Yujin, and because it's so ugly, no woman loves it, which is why it grew hate in its heart, and began robbing others of their brides to ruin their happy occasions. They thought that might have been a rumor at the time. Who would have guessed there really was such a person? Be that as it may, whether he was the Ghostgrim was a different matter altogether. Shi Lian was just about to take a closer look at the bandaged boy when Xiao Ying rushed over. She yelled, "You've got the wrong person! This isn't the Ghostgrim! He isn't!" Xiao Pengtou shouted back, "He was caught red-handed and you still say he isn't? He paused, as if something had suddenly dawned on him. Then he continued, "Oh, I was wondering why you're always acting so strange, always insisting he isn't! So you're in cahoots with this Ghostgrim?" Stunned, Xiao Ying hurriedly waved her hands. No, I'm not. He's not either. He hasn't done anything. He's just an ordinary... Xiao Pengtou pressed on aggressively. Ordinary what? Ordinary ugly freak? He yanked at the bandaged boy's hair a couple of times and said, "Then why don't we take a look at how this ordinary Ghostgrim looks, since he loves stealing others' women so much?" His random grabbing made a mess of the few strips of the bandages, and the bandaged boy instantly held his head and screamed. His cries were full of fear, incredibly mournful and pitiful. Shi Lian seized Xiao Pengtou's arm. Enough! When Xiao Ying heard the boy's screams, her tears tumbled down, and when she saw Shi Lian stopping Xiao Pengtou, it was akin to seeing hope. She hurriedly grabbed his sleeves and begged, Young master, help me! Help him!" Shi Lian cast her a look, and Xiao Ying let go of his sleeve in embarrassment, as if afraid he would scorn her touchy-feely hands and would not want to help her anymore. Shi Lian comforted her. "It's fine." He took another look at the bloody-headed bandaged boy and realized that he was also peeking at Shi Lian with wide, bloodshot eyes through the gaps in the bandages under his hands. The boy only stole a glance before quickly lowering his eyes, and he hurriedly secured the bandages again. Although he did not reveal his face, a patch of skin was exposed, and that bit was already horrifying, as if it had been burned by fire. It was not hard to imagine how scary the rest of his face that laid under the bandages was, and the others sucked in a breath while the boy shrank even more. Shi Lian noticed that the way those two cowered was exactly the same. It was as if they were afraid to step into the light, afraid to see other people. He sighed inwardly. Next to them, Xiao Pengtou was alarmed. "What are you scheming? We're the ones who caught the Ghostgrim." Shi Lian let go of him. "I'm afraid the Ghostgrim won't let you catch him so easily. My friend searched around here earlier, but he didn't find him. It's possible this boy came much later. The real Ghostgrim should still be here." Xiao Ying also mustered up her courage. "You want the reward money, but you can't just catch anyone at random to make up the numbers." Xiao Pengtou clearly wanted to hit her again after hearing this. He had been causing trouble since earlier, and Shi Lian finally couldn't endure it anymore. He waved his hand, and Roya flew out to give Xiao Pengtou a slap with a thwack that knocked him over. Nanfeng seemed to have reached his limit too, and immediately followed up with a kick. The youth finally toppled to the ground and remained still. This person was the lead instigator, so once he became immobile, the crowd didn't know who to take aim at and settled down. There were a few scattered outcries here and there, but the commotion was over. Shilian thought, "Finally, we can get down to business." He seized up the young boy on the ground for a moment, then asked, "Were you the one who threw the rock in the window earlier?" His voice was gentle. The bandaged boy, who was trembling uncontrollably, peeked at him again and nodded. Xiao Ying explained, "He doesn't want to harm anyone. He just wanted to help me when it looked like Xiao Pingtou was going to hit me." Shilian asked the boy again, "Do you know what's with all those corpses hanging in the forest?" Xiao Ying answered, "I don't know what's going on, but he's definitely not the one who hung them up." The bandaged boy trembled nonstop, but all he did was shake his head repeatedly. Nanfeng, who had been staring at him, suddenly said, "Who is the green ghost Qi Rong to you?" Shilian gave a slight start on hearing that name. The bandaged boy, however, just looked blank. He showed no reaction when the name was uttered, and he was too scared to reply to Nanfeng. He's too scared to talk," Xiao Ying explained. All this while she had been trying her best to protect this strange boy. Shilian implored gently, "Miss Xiao Ying, what exactly is the matter with this child? Tell me everything you know." Xiao Ying seemed to summon up a little courage at the sight of Shilian. Firelight shone brightly on her face, but she was no longer avoiding it. Wringing her hands, she said, "He really didn't do anything bad. This child simply lives on Mount Yuzhen. Sometimes when he's too hungry, he'll run down the mountain to steal some food. There was once when he happened to steal from my house. I saw that he couldn't really talk, and there were injuries on his face, so I found some cloth for him to bandage himself with. I'd also give him food sometimes." Shilian had initially thought them to be a couple, but now that he learned all of this, Xiao Ying's reciprocal protectiveness was more like that of an older sister, or even an elder taking care of him. She added, "Later, there were many who thought he was the ghost Grim. I couldn't convince them, so I could only hope that the real culprit would be quickly captured. I thought since you're so capable, prepared to act as a bride to catch the ghost Grim and everything, then, at the very least, you wouldn't catch the wrong person. Because he would never, ever hijack the wedding sedan. But the moment I headed over, I heard that Xiao Pingtou and the rest wanted to search the mountain today, too. I was really worried, so I secretly came up to take a look." She stood as a shield before the boy, like she was afraid the others would hit him again, and defended him further. "He really isn't the ghost Grim. Look at him. It's taken so few to beat him like this. How in the world could he defeat so many military officers escorting the bride's sedan?" Shilian and Nanfeng exchanged glances, both equally finding this to be a headache. If it was as she said, then wasn't the boy completely unrelated to this incident? The bandaged boy, the Wrath Ghost Groom, the near supreme green ghost, and that powerful, influential master of the silver butterflies, who made all the heavenly officials turn pale at the mere mention of his name. To think that this small Mount Yuzhen would see a never-ending flow of strange guests. This was truly a tough case to deal with. Who was who? What was the relationship between who and who? Shilian felt his headache intensify several times over. He rubbed his forehead and temporarily stopped thinking about how much truth there was in Xiao Ying's words. Something else suddenly came to mind that he'd been meaning to ask, and he said, "Miss Xiao Ying, have you always lived near Mount Yuzhen?" Xiao Ying replied, "Yes, I've always lived here. I can guarantee that he has never done anything bad here." "No, I wanted to ask you something else," Shilian said. "Are there no other temples of Minguang built in the vicinity of Mount Yuzhen, other than the one on this mountain?" Xiao Ying was taken aback. She thought about it, then said, "There should have been others, I think." At her response, Shilian suddenly had the vague feeling that he'd grasped something important. He asked, "Then why did I only see a temple of Nanyang at the foot of the mountain, but not a temple of Minguang?" Xiao Ying scratched her head. "They tried to build one before, but I heard that every time construction of a temple of Minguang was in the works, there would always be a fire for some reason halfway through. Some people said that it was probably meant that General Minguang could not protect this place for some reason, so they switched to Nanyang instead." Nanfeng, who noticed Shilian's frozen expression, asked, "What's the matter with you?" Shilian suddenly realized that it was all too simple. The brides who could not smile, the temple that caught fire for no reason, the temple of Minguang locked away by the enchanted array in the mountain, the majestic, martial god statue of General Pei, the ghost groom who had disappeared into thin air after being wounded by Ryoya. All too simple. It was only because there was always something else interfering, all diverting his attention that he hadn't realized such a simple truth right from the start. He forcibly seized hold of Nanfeng and exclaimed, "Lend me some spiritual powers." Nanfeng was startled but hurriedly struck a palm with him in midair. He asked, "What's the matter?" Shilian dragged him and ran. "I'll explain later. Think of a way to subdue the corpses of those 18 brides first." Nanfeng said, "Have you lost your senses? There are only 17 brides' corpses. You're the 18th. Shilian said, No. He explained, "There were only 17 before, but now there are 18. Among the 18 brides' corpses, one is fake. The ghost groom is hiding among them." The two dashed back to the temple of Minguang. However, the back of the great hall was already completely empty. There was only a pile of messily strewn red veils where the bride stood earlier. Seeing this sight, Shilian cried mentally, This is bad. Darn it. He quickly picked up the veils on the ground. After he did so, he heard alarmed cries coming from outside the temple. The two looked out the window and saw that a mob of women in scarlet wedding dresses had formed a circle and were slowly closing in on the group of villagers. Each of the women had a pale, greenish face wearing a smile, her arms raised straight out. They were the corpses of the brides from earlier. No one could remain calm while watching helplessly as they slowly closed in. The crowd didn't care to accost the bandaged boy anymore and fled. Xiaoying immediately rushed over to support him. Shilian called out helplessly, "Don't run!" He had lost count of how many times he'd said that tonight. Whenever something happened, he'd have to say it at least 30 to 40 times, yet there was always someone ignoring him. What a helpless affair. He waved his hand and the silk band Roya flew out toward the sky. He made a casual hand sign and Roya began whirling in the air on its own, like the mad dance of a celestial being, incredibly eye-catching. When those brides saw that there was something over this way, lively and spinning rapidly with its tail whipping at them, a good number of them were lured over. There were also 7 that were attached to the scent of blood in the deep of the forest, so they slowly hopped in that direction. Shilian exclaimed, "Follow them, Nanfeng! Don't let them go down the mountain!" He didn't need to worry. Nanfeng had already gone off to chase them. 2 of the brides came and attacked in Shilian's direction, their fingers bright red, their nails sharp. Shilian took out the red veils he had collected off the ground earlier and hurled them out with both hands. 2 of the veils spun as they shot out, squarely covering the heads of those 2 brides. Instantly, their movement stalled. As expected, with the heavy, bright red veils covering the eyes and noses of those corpses, they could no longer see the shadows of mortals, nor smell their scent. And since their dead bodies were stiff, they couldn't bend their arms to remove the veils. They could only grab randomly at the air with their arms extended as if they were playing a blind man's bluff. This was truly both a horrifying and silly sight. Shilian stood in front of them and tentatively waved his hands in front of the 2 brides' eyes, and when he saw they were grabbing cluelessly in another direction, he contemplated for a moment. But in the end, he still couldn't help but say, "Please forgive my impropriety," before seizing their arms and placing their claws on each other's necks. When the 2 brides suddenly felt something in their hands, their bodies shook, and since they couldn't see anything, they started strangling each other viciously. Shilian then quickly ran off with a wide wave of his hands, and Roya followed him like a streak of white rainbow before landing on the ground to form a large white circle. Shilian called after the people who were fleeing in all directions, "Everyone get in the circle!" The group hesitated as they ran, but Xiaoying immediately helped the bandaged boy over to stand inside. After some thought, she ran out again and dragged Xiao Pengtou, who was passed out on the ground, into the circle as well. Right then, one of the brides hopped to the edge of the white circle, and her claws shot out to grab for them. Yet it was as if there was a transparent wall that forcibly divided the space. Xiaoying noticed the bride couldn't hop in no matter how she tried and quickly shouted, "Everyone come in quick! They can't enter this circle!" When the men saw this, they hurried back like a swarm of bees. Thankfully, Shilian had Roya burst to a great length beforehand, and the circle was big enough. Otherwise, he would be worried there would be people squeezed out because it was too cramped. The brides couldn't hop into the circle, and knew they couldn't do anything to this group, so they uniformly spun around, and, shrieking, lunged in Shilian's direction. However, Shilian was already waiting for them, and from his sleeve he pulled out a large bundle of veils. The many red cloths in his hands spun up, down, left, right, flying in all directions, both his hands and feet moving non-stop, covering each one as they came, swift and precise. With each bride veiled, the bride would begin to slow and feel around like a blind person. The veils in his hands were spun to blurs, as they were thrown with ease. forming countless red silhouettes flying through the air. The people inside the circle actually started cheering in spite of themselves. Nice! Amazing! So amazing! You trained for this, right? When Shilian heard them, he blurted out of habit, Thank you, thank you. Please support my act with money if you have the means, or with applause if you haven't. Wait. He only noticed something wrong after the words left his lips. He'd gotten caught up and let slip the speech he used to say when he'd busked and hurriedly stopped himself. While he was talking, several more brides jumped up. Jumps that were surprisingly over 2 meters high and 10 meters long, and in the span of a second, the stench of rot came before his nose. Shilian pushed off with the tip of his foot, his body sweeping past them, and while in the air, he mentally chanted the verbal password to a certain private communication array. Lingwen the All-Knowing, I have a question. Do you know if the Martial God of the North, General Minguang, had any intimate female friends? Lingwen's voice rang in his ear. Your Highness, why do you ask? I've got a bit of a situation here right now. Kind of urgent, Shilian said. Not gonna lie, there are a dozen dead people chasing me right now. Huh? That's awful. Lingwen was shocked. Not too horrible, Shilian said. So, did he? I know this question is more personal in nature and that it's not